They say money changes everything, but for Jonathan Harrington, it shattered the very foundations of his life. Imagine a pristine Beverly Hills mansion filled with priceless art and velvet carpets, once a symbol of marital bliss, now a stage for betrayal. On the day Elizabeth Harrington arrived to serve her millionaire husband with divorce papers, no one could have predicted the explosive secrets about to erupt behind those polished doors. Yet what started as a simple legal matter spiraled into a twisted maze of deceit, blackmail, and hidden agendas. And in a shocking final twist, the mistress was the one hauled away in handcuffs. To the outside world, Jonathan Harrington appeared to be the epitome of success. Tall, silver-haired, and exuding the assured confidence that came with a nine-figure net worth, he charmed guests at every social event across the affluent enclaves of Southern California. Whether he was hosting a fundraiser for local artists or attending high-profile galas, Jonathan's poised demeanor and refined manners made him the darling of the society pages. He hailed from humble beginnings in Long Beach. His mother was an elementary school teacher, and his father was an auto mechanic. Early on, Jonathan displayed an uncanny ability to spot opportunities. In his teenage years, he launched a small tech repair stand out of his parents' garage, which eventually led to an e-commerce business during the dot-com boom. After many late nights coding and a few near bankruptcies, he finally sold his startup for a windfall. One successful venture led to another, culminating in Harrington Enterprises, a private equity firm rumored to manage nearly $1 billion in assets. Married for nearly a decade, Jonathan and Elizabeth Harrington seemed to have it all: a sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills, invitations to the most exclusive parties, a philanthropic foundation that donated generously to children's hospitals, and a love story that tabloids reported as a fairy tale. Together they formed a power couple that epitomized wealth and elegance. Yet beneath the glimmering surface, cracks began to form. Elizabeth Harrington, née Elizabeth Carmichael, was herself from an illustrious lineage. She had studied business at the University of Pennsylvania, crossing paths with Jonathan at a Wharton alumni mixer in Manhattan. Their shared ambitions and passions, fine art, travel, and philanthropic causes, drew them together fast. Within 6 months, Jonathan proposed on the balcony of a Paris hotel overlooking the Eiffel Tower, sealing their union in a grand wedding on the beaches of Malibu. However, money, fame, and power can sometimes corrupt even the most stable relationships. While Elizabeth was busy running the Harrington Foundation's philanthropic branch, Jonathan was turning his attention to new ventures and new enticements, drifting further from the marital vows that once bound them. Unbeknownst to many, his enthrallment with business expansion had become overshadowed by an enthrallment with someone else, a seductive younger woman named Cheryl Lansing. The Harrington mansion was a fortress of secrets. High walls, private security, and extensive grounds shielded the family from prying eyes. But even the thickest walls couldn't keep out the silent tensions building within. Any outsider might still believe in the perfect facade. But Elizabeth felt the dissonance every day. Jonathan would leave at odd hours, glance furtively at his phone, and show up to events with lipstick stains that weren't hers. In hushed arguments behind closed doors, he denied everything, claiming business emergencies or last-minute overseas calls. Each denial chipped away at Elizabeth's trust. One morning, Elizabeth woke up to an empty bed. Normally, Jonathan's early work schedule wouldn't alarm her, but that day, the hush in the house felt ominous. She had caught glimpses of his phone the previous night, noticing text messages from an unknown contact named CL. full of hearts and late-night confessions. The final straw had arrived, and her heartbreak turned to determination. She needed the truth. She would get the truth, no matter the cost. Elizabeth confided in her friend and lawyer, Andrea Coleman. Andrea had worked with high-net-worth divorce cases for over a decade and had a reputation for ferocious loyalty to her clients. If Elizabeth was going to confront Jonathan's infidelity, it wouldn't be done half-heartedly. Andrea recommended that Elizabeth hire a private investigator, someone discreet, who could gather the evidence she needed to confront Jonathan without alerting him. Elizabeth hesitated at the idea of surveilling her husband, but heartbreak and betrayal drove her forward. So she contracted Raymond Hale, a seasoned investigator who had previously worked with the Los Angeles Police Department. Hale specialized in cheating spouses and dark secrets behind billionaire gates. Weeks passed while Elizabeth pretended everything was normal. She attended charity luncheons, had polite conversation with Jonathan when he was home, and dressed impeccably for society gatherings, but inside, her anxiety grew. Late at night, she would pace the echoing corridors of their mansion, waiting for a text message from Hale, with updates on her husband's whereabouts. Finally, on a crisp morning in November, Hale called her. "I have everything you need," he said. His tone, though professional, carried a weight that hinted at the gravity of his findings. Elizabeth met Hale at a small cafe far from Beverly Hills to avoid being seen. The private investigator sat down, slid a USB drive across the table, and calmly told her what he had discovered. Jonathan was renting a luxurious apartment near Sunset Boulevard under a shell company name. He visited this apartment at odd hours, usually on nights when he claimed to be working late. Photographs showed him entering and leaving with a woman slender, with flowing auburn hair and a penchant for stiletto heels. Her name was Cheryl Lansing, a former model turned aspiring actress. Elizabeth felt her stomach lurch. She had suspected his infidelity, but seeing it confirmed with photographic evidence ripped a new hole in her heart. Hale's dossier also included bank transfers Jonathan had made to Lansing, covered by untraceable entities. It was more than a fling. He was financially supporting this mistress. The betrayal ran deeper than Elizabeth could have imagined. Though tears threatened to escape her eyes, Elizabeth composed herself. "Thank you," she said to Hale, her voice trembling. "You've done more than enough." Elizabeth spent that night staring at the damning photos scattered across her desk. The images weren't just snapshots of betrayal, they were her impetus to act. Anger replaced sorrow. She realized Jonathan wasn't just betraying her, but also jeopardizing the family's reputation and philanthropic mission. After hours of deliberation, she called Andrea Coleman and informed her of the next step divorce. Andrea advised that they proceed carefully. Jonathan was powerful and well-connected. He had entire legal teams at his disposal, part of Harrington Enterprises and their in-house counsel. If Elizabeth wanted a clean break, without losing her fair share and without being smeared in the press, she needed to be strategic. Thus, Elizabeth and Andrea spent days crafting an airtight divorce plan. This included a request for spousal support retention of certain real estate properties and protective clauses for Elizabeth's personal assets. They chose a date and method to serve the papers that would ensure maximum confidentiality. But ironically, that plan would soon be overshadowed by a series of unforeseeable events culminating in a morning that would change all their lives forever. The day Elizabeth intended to serve Jonathan with divorce papers started off almost serene. She drove through the mansion's gates, her hands gripping the steering wheel tight. A file folder containing all the legal documents sat in the passenger seat, a silent witness to her turmoil. She had arranged to serve him at the Beverly Hills mansion formally, with a process server present and Andrea by her side. But as Elizabeth's SUV pulled into the driveway, her heart kicked into overdrive. Parked there next to Jonathan's Bentley was a sleek red convertible. It wasn't Jonathan's style. She knew at once whose it was. Stepping out of the car, Elizabeth noticed that the household staff seemed on edge. The butler Morris discreetly looked away as though anticipating a confrontation. Elizabeth's stiletto heels clicked against the marble floor in the foyer, echoing like a drum roll, announcing a show about to begin. In the living room, she found Jonathan and Cheryl. Cheryl lounged casually on the white leather sofa, swirling a glass of champagne at 10 in the morning. Jonathan stood behind her, wearing a frustrated grimace. The ambiance was thick with tension. "Elizabeth," he said, forcing a polite tone, "this is unexpected." Elizabeth stared at Cheryl, who looked her up and down with thinly veiled smugness. "I'm sure it is," Elizabeth replied coolly. She glanced at the champagne bottle chilling in a silver ice bucket. Celebrating something, Cheryl raised her glass. "Jonathan and I are finalizing some business. I'm sure you understand." Elizabeth's anger simmered, but she refused to let her composure slip. Andrea appeared in the doorway, followed by a process server holding an envelope. Jonathan's eyes darted to them, then back to Elizabeth, a look of dread seeping in. "I guess this is as good a time as any," Elizabeth said. She took the envelope from the process server. "Jonathan Harrington, you've been served." The hush that followed was deafening. Even Cheryl set down her glass. Jonathan's gaze burned with betrayal and shock, though for Elizabeth it was too little too late. He opened his mouth to speak, but seemed lost for words. Cheryl stood up, the smirk gone from her face. She looked from Elizabeth to Jonathan, confusion dawning. "You can't be serious," Jonathan finally managed. "Divorce," Elizabeth nodded. "Dead serious. I have evidence of your affair. This arrangement," she gestured around the lavish living room, "is over." Before Jonathan could respond, footsteps thundered down the hallway. A trio of uniformed LAPD officers appeared at the living room entrance, led by Detective Carl Donahue. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man who carried an air of authority that could silence a crowd. "Jonathan Harrington," Detective Donahue asked, scanning the room. Jonathan blinked. "Yes, we have a warrant to search the premises." The detective flashed paperwork and nodded at his officers. "We have reason to believe there's incriminating evidence here related to fraud, possibly linked to Harrington Enterprises." The shock in Jonathan's face was immediate. Elizabeth, too, was stunned. This was no longer just a divorce. Something bigger was unfolding. Cheryl clutched her designer purse. Andrea quickly stepped forward. "Detective, this must be some kind of misunderstanding," she began. "We haven't been informed of any." Detective Donahue held up a hand. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." The officers fanned out, opening drawers, checking electronics, scanning the coffee tables for documents. Jonathan, regaining a semblance of composure, tried to protest. "You can't just barge in here with no cause," he said angrily, but Donahue waved the warrant. "We do have cause. We received an anonymous tip that certain records might be here. Some cross-border transactions that look suspicious." Elizabeth stared at Jonathan, her mind racing. Fraud, anonymous tip. A swirl of possibilities filled her head. Jonathan had always been a savvy businessman. But could he be involved in criminal activities? In the corner, Cheryl looked unusually pale. She fiddled nervously with her phone thumb, tapping out a message or two. Elizabeth noticed this with narrowed eyes. Cheryl had shown surprising nerves at the mention of fraud. Something was amiss. And so, in a matter of minutes, a simple plan to serve divorce papers transformed into a chaotic standoff involving legal documents, a mistress, and the police. Elizabeth could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet, as if years of secrets were about to burst forth. Little did she know, the darkest revelations were yet to come. The police search extended far beyond the living room. Rooms were cordoned off. Officers meticulously combed through officers' bedrooms, even the private study that Jonathan rarely allowed anyone else to enter. Piles of documents, laptops, and USB drives were bagged as evidence. Elizabeth found herself in the foyer, with Andrea away from the rummaging. Jonathan was with Detective Donahue in his study, presumably answering questions. Cheryl lingered nearby, antsy and glaring at Elizabeth. She seemed poised to either lash out or flee. Andrea leaned in and whispered, "Whatever is going on here, it's serious. That detective isn't just on a fishing expedition." Elizabeth nodded, her pulse thudding. "I've never heard any rumors about fraud or shady deals. Do you think Jonathan could have done something illegal?" Andrea shrugged. "It's possible, or it could be a competitor trying to sabotage him. The timing is too perfect to be random, though." Suddenly, Cheryl sauntered over, her expression a mix of contempt and unease. "You must be thrilled," she sneered, "serving him divorce papers on the very day the cops raid his house. You're probably behind this, aren't you?" Elizabeth felt a flash of anger. "I have nothing to do with the police being here," she snapped, "though you look more nervous than he does. Something you want to share?" Cheryl's eyes flashed. "Don't play games with me. You're just a bitter wife who didn't know how to keep your husband satisfied." Elizabeth opened her mouth, ready to respond, with the retort that had been simmering when Andrea gently placed a hand on her arm. "Let's not do this now," Andrea said softly. She turned to Cheryl. "We have enough chaos without adding personal squabbles." Cheryl shot them both a hateful look and stormed down the hallway, presumably to find Jonathan. Andrea exhaled. "She's not just a mistress. There's something else going on. Keep your eyes open." Over the next hour, Detective Donahue's men emerged with a trove of documents and digital files. Among them were secret ledgers, coded references, and suspicious bank statements funneling money through shell companies. Elizabeth recognized some of the company names from the private investigator's file, the same ones Jonathan used to fund Cheryl's expensive lifestyle. The question was why Detective Donahue finally stepped out of Jonathan's study, where Jonathan remained, likely stewing over his predicament. The detective approached Elizabeth, who stiffened instinctively. "I understand you're Mrs. Harrington," Donahue said. His tone was firm, but not unkind. Elizabeth nodded. "Yes, that's correct." He paused, scanning her expression. "You have any idea what's been going on with your husband's financial dealings?" Elizabeth swallowed. "I only learned recently that he was siphoning money to his mistress, but I had no idea there might be criminal activity." Donahue frowned. "We have reason to believe certain funds were used to bribe foreign officials. We're investigating possible embezzlement and money laundering. My advice, ma'am, get yourself a good criminal attorney, or at least consult with one. Because if these activities were done jointly, or if your name appears on documents," Elizabeth's stomach sank. I had no knowledge." "I understand," Donahue said. "But knowledge or not, you share marital assets and certain responsibilities. So watch your step." He tipped his head politely and walked away, leaving Elizabeth reeling. Andrea quickly reassured her, "Don't panic. We'll ensure you're protected." But even as Andrea spoke, Elizabeth's mind drifted to her philanthropic foundation, which was partly funded by Harrington Enterprises. Could those funds be implicated? For years, she had believed the resources were legitimate, fueling charitable causes. Now she worried the entire philanthropic arm might be tainted by Jonathan's alleged crimes. On the other side of the mansion, voices rose in argument. Jonathan and Cheryl were locked in a heated dispute behind closed doors. Elizabeth's curiosity, piqued, quietly stepped closer. She heard snippets through the door. "You promised me it was all clean," Cheryl hissed. "Stop talking about it here," Jonathan growled. "There's no proof. They can't pin anything on me. Then why am I seeing text messages about blackmail or your frantic bank transfers? You better fix this, Jonathan, or I swear." Their voices lowered, making the rest unintelligible. Elizabeth's heart pounded. Blackmail bank transfers, something far more devious than a simple affair, was at play, and by the end of this day, she feared the magnitude of betrayal would explode beyond all comprehension. After the police concluded their search, they left with boxes of evidence. Jonathan, pale and trembling with anger, emerged from his study. Elizabeth was still there in the living room with Andrea. Jonathan glared at her divorce papers in hand. "You planned this," he accused, voice raw. "You took the first chance to bring the cops down on me." Elizabeth set her jaw. "I told you I had nothing to do with it. I'm here to serve divorce papers because you cheated on me and lied. That's enough reason to end this marriage." He shook his head, eyes flickering to Andrea. "Whatever you think you know, you're only scratching the surface." Then, in a biting tone, he said, "I hope you're prepared for the fallout. Because it's not just me they'll come after." A heavy silence followed. Andrea gently guided Elizabeth out of the mansion, advising they leave before the confrontation escalated. As they stepped out into the driveway, they noticed Cheryl standing beside her red convertible phone in the hand. She locked eyes with Elizabeth, malice etched in every line of her face. Without a word, she got into her car and sped away. Elizabeth watched her go, tension coiled in every muscle. "She's up to something, Andrea," she murmured. "I can feel it." Andrea nodded. "We'll keep an eye on her. Let's focus on protecting you first." They drove to Andrea's office, an upscale suite in a Century City high-rise. Once inside, Elizabeth recounted everything she'd overheard, the blackmail threats, the mysterious text messages. Andrea typed notes rapidly, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "This could be bigger than just a mistress milking him for money," Andrea said. "Maybe there's evidence that Cheryl was involved in whatever illegal activity Jonathan is being investigated for. She might be the link tying him to those suspicious transactions." Elizabeth ran a hand through her hair, exhaustion settling in. "What do we do next?" "I'll file the divorce paperwork officially tomorrow," Andrea replied. "Meanwhile, we should look into securing your personal assets, and we'll consult a criminal attorney about the possible charges the police mentioned. I don't think you'll be implicated, but we can't be too careful." The rest of the day was a whirlwind of phone calls and paperwork. Elizabeth's mind spun with questions. Had her entire marriage been a lie? Was the philanthropic empire she built with Jonathan tainted by corruption? Who was Cheryl really, and how deep did her involvement run? Evening, Elizabeth checked into a discreet suite at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. She couldn't stomach returning to the mansion. As she gazed out at the twinkling city lights, she replayed the day's events in her mind. Serving Jonathan with divorce papers should have been a moment of relief, a step toward regaining her independence. Instead, it was overshadowed by a looming legal scandal, an ominous mistress, and a swarm of unanswered questions. Slumping into the plush armchair, Elizabeth realized she was truly alone for the first time in years. No Jonathan, no staff, no illusions of a perfect life. Tears slipped from her eyes as the city lights blurred. Part of her wanted to cling to anger, but sadness mingled with fear, forging a loneliness that felt insurmountable. Still, a glimmer of resolve sparked within her. She had come too far to crumble. There was a reason she'd built the charitable foundation, a reason she'd navigated high society with grace. She was strong, and she wouldn't let Jonathan's deceit define her. Little did she know, the revelations that lay ahead would demand more courage than she'd ever imagined. The next morning, Elizabeth woke to her phone buzzing. It was Andrea. "We need to talk now," her lawyer said, voice tense. 30 minutes later, Elizabeth found herself in a small conference room at Andrea's firm. Waiting with Andrea was a man Elizabeth recognized, Robert Mullins, a high-profile criminal defense attorney based in Los Angeles. He had represented celebrities and moguls in headline-making cases. The man's presence immediately set Elizabeth's nerves alight. Mrs. Harrington Mullins greeted, offering a polite handshake. "Andrea told me about your situation. I'm here to ensure you're protected if the authorities come knocking." Elizabeth nodded, settling into a chair. Mullins got straight to the point. "The police suspect Jonathan of money laundering and bribery of foreign officials. That means they'll be looking at all his financial relationships, including his marriage. We need to make it clear you were not involved in, nor had knowledge of these alleged crimes." Elizabeth explained her philanthropic work and her recent discovery of Jonathan's affair and suspicious transactions. Mullins listened occasionally, scribbling notes. "You need to sever legal ties as quickly as possible," he said. "That means continuing with the divorce, but also ensuring any joint accounts or business ventures are either closed or restricted, so you're not held liable for his potential wrongdoing." As they mapped out a strategy, Elizabeth's phone buzzed again. She glanced down to see an unfamiliar number. Thinking it might be an investigator or someone from the foundation, she answered. A trembling voice on the other end said, "Elizabeth, it's Maurice the butler. I hope I'm not disturbing you." She frowned. "Maurice, is everything okay?" A pause. "I think you need to come back to the mansion. Something happened with Miss Cheryl. She's here with boxes taking some of Mr. Harrington's belongings. She's threatening to destroy things if we don't let her in. I'm sorry, but Mr. Harrington is out and no one else can stop her." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "I'll be right there." She quickly explained the situation to Andrea and Mullins. "That woman has no right to remove anything from my home," she said, voice taut with fury. Mullins offered to come along, but Elizabeth insisted it might be more diplomatic if she went alone with Andrea. Mullins agreed, but reminded her to record everything for evidence and call the police if she refuses to leave, he added. 20 minutes later, Elizabeth and Andrea pulled up to the mansion. Sure enough, Cheryl was at the front door, flanked by two men in dark suits who appeared to be private security. Several large cardboard boxes were stacked near the entrance. As soon as Cheryl spotted Elizabeth, she rolled her eyes dramatically. "Finally decided to show your face," Cheryl snapped. "Jonathan told me to pick up some of his things." Elizabeth glowered. "Where is Jonathan?" Cheryl shrugged. "He left me a message last night. He told me he's staying somewhere else for a few days while the cops sort out their little fiasco. I'm just helping him pack." Andrea eyed the private security men. "Do you have a signed authorization? A list of what you're entitled to take?" One of the men handed over a piece of paper. Andrea glanced at it, her lips tightening. "This is barely legible. A handwritten note signed only by Jonathan. We have no verification of his signature or the inventory of items you're removing." Cheryl's face darkened. "It's legit. Besides, I'm only taking personal effects, his documents, clothing, and a few knickknacks. Or are you going to stop me?" Elizabeth folded her arms. I have every right to stop you if you're removing items that belong to me or to the estate. Anything purchased during our marriage is subject to community property laws in California, and until we finalize the divorce, you can't just waltz in and take what you want." Cheryl smirked. "I'd watch your tone. You have no idea what Jonathan and I share, financially or otherwise." She stepped closer, lowering her pulse. "I'm not just a fling. We have a partnership, and that means a lot of what you thought was yours might be mine now." The threat sent Elizabeth's heart racing. "Partnership," she repeated. "Are you implying you're involved in his businesses?" Cheryl waved a hand dismissively. "It's too complicated for you to understand. Now, if you don't mind, I have boxes to fill, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't stand in my way." Andrea stepped between them. "We can resolve this in a civilized manner. If Mr. Harrington wants personal items, he can request them through his attorney. Until then, you have no right to be here uninvited." Cheryl laughed, a harsh sound echoing in the polished foyer. "I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." With that, she motioned for her security men to carry the boxes inside. Elizabeth felt her blood boiling. This mistress-turned possible accomplice was acting like she owned the place. For a moment, Elizabeth imagined forcibly throwing Cheryl out, but she knew better. One mistake could jeopardize her legal standing. She glanced at Andrea, who gave a subtle nod. Elizabeth pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police, right now." Cheryl's smile vanished. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," Elizabeth shot back. "And I will." She tapped 911, feeling an odd surge of adrenaline. Whether Cheryl was bluffing or truly had some claim to Jonathan's assets, Elizabeth wasn't going to let her ransack the house unchecked. Cheryl's face flickered with panic. She exchanged a worried glance with her security men. "Let's go," she hissed, waving for them to exit. "It's not worth it." They stomped out as the dispatcher answered. Elizabeth calmly explained the situation, though. By the time she finished, Cheryl and her entourage were peeling away from the driveway in that red convertible. The boxes remained empty, scattered near the entrance. Elizabeth exhaled shakily relief, mingled with foreboding. If Cheryl was brazen enough to show up demanding property, what else was she capable of? The deeper this rabbit hole went, the more Elizabeth felt like she was caught in a labyrinth of lies, each turn revealing yet another threat. That same afternoon, Elizabeth decided to visit the Harrington Foundation's headquarters in downtown Los Angeles. She'd avoided the office for days, grappling with the personal turmoil. But the conversation with Detective Donahue about possible money laundering and the memory of Cheryl's threats weighed heavily on her mind. She needed answers. The foundation occupied an entire floor in a gleaming skyscraper. Walls of glass overlooked the city, and the reception area was adorned with photographs of charitable endeavors, hospital wings they had funded, educational scholarships they had provided, and international relief programs. Walking through, Elizabeth felt a sharp pang of nostalgia. This was her life's work, the legacy she wanted to build with Jonathan. An uneasy hush settled over the staff as she entered. Everyone knew about the divorce rumors swirling, and many had witnessed the news footage of the police at the Harrington mansion. She offered polite nods, forcing a tight smile, and headed straight for her office. Inside, she found her assistant, Mia Delgado, sorting through a stack of folders. Mia's eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. "Mrs. Harrington, thank goodness you're here." Elizabeth set her purse down. "What's going on, Mia? Is something wrong?" Mia hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she handed over a folder. "Auditors came by earlier, accompanied by a police officer. They requested documents relating to the Foundation's overseas transactions. They even mentioned potential involvement in the investigation against Jonathan. I gave them everything I had. Elizabeth flipped through the folder. It contained requests for budgets, receipts, and wire transfers, some that looked entirely unfamiliar to her. Large sums of money had been funneled to accounts in Dubai, Singapore, and other financial hubs. She recognized some philanthropic projects, but not nearly enough to justify those amounts. These transactions, Elizabeth said slowly, her voice quivering, they don't match the normal budgets we allocate to international programs. Who authorized them? Mia shook her head. I don't know. They're signed off by Jonathan, but also there's another signature. I can't make it out. Elizabeth studied the scrawled signature next to Jonathan's. It wasn't hers, nor Andrea's. Then a chilling thought crossed her mind. Could it be Cheryl's? She had never seen Cheryl's signature, but the loops and curves had a feminine flair. If Cheryl had somehow embedded herself into the foundation's finances, it could be catastrophic. Clutching the folder, Elizabeth felt a rising wave of nausea. She sank into her desk chair. Mia, how long have these transactions been happening? For at least a year, Mia said softly. I only discovered them when the auditors pointed it out. They said some of the accounts had been flagged for irregular activity. Elizabeth's mind reeled. A year. How had she missed this? She prided herself on her involvement with the foundation, yet she'd never noticed such massive wire transfers. Had Jonathan deliberately kept her in the dark, forging her signature on official documents, or had he used Cheryl as a proxy? Either way, it felt like betrayal on a grand scale. I'm so sorry, Mia murmured, tears in her eyes. I should have caught this sooner. Elizabeth reached out to clasp Mia's hand. This isn't your fault. Jonathan had the power to bypass normal checks. We'll fix it. But even as she said the words, she wondered if it was too late. If the foundation was implicated in money laundering, everything she'd built was at risk. Her reputation, her philanthropic mission, even the scholarships that relied on their funds. With every new revelation, it felt like Jonathan had orchestrated an elaborate fraud using the foundation's good name as camouflage. Before leaving, Elizabeth locked the questionable documents in a fireproof cabinet. She instructed Mia to forward copies to Andrea Coleman and Robert Mullins. If the police were already involved, it was best to be transparent and cooperative. Hiding anything would only raise suspicion. As she left the office, staff members looked at her with a mix of sympathy and anxiety. She felt the weight of their collective hopes on her shoulders. They were counting on her to steer the foundation out of this quagmire. And she vowed that Jonathan, no matter how far he'd gone, would not drag them all down. That evening, Elizabeth sat in her hotel suite, surrounded by legal documents and financial records. The city lights flickered outside, a jarring contrast to her internal storm. Her phone pinged with a message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Now, C.L. Elizabeth's heart skipped. Cheryl Lansing. She stared at the text, her mind racing. What did Cheryl want? Another confrontation, yet curiosity and a desire for the truth pushed her to respond. Meet me at the Ivy on Robertson, 10 p.m. She sent the message, half expecting Cheryl to ignore it. But within seconds, the reply came, fine. Don't be late. At 9:58 p.m., Elizabeth arrived at the Ivy, a chic restaurant known for celebrity sightings. Usually bustling by day, it was quieter at night, with only a few patrons finishing late dinners. She chose a secluded table on the patio, arms folded, nerves on edge. Cheryl arrived at 10:05 p.m., her auburn hair gleaming under the string lights. She wore a tight, designer dress and stiletto heels, drawing the attention of the remaining diners. Sliding into the seat across from Elizabeth, she didn't bother with pleasantries. You're probably wondering why I texted Cheryl, began leaning forward. Let's just say we have a mutual interest in preventing Jonathan's downfall. Elizabeth resisted a snort. You assume I care what happens to Jonathan? Cheryl rolled her eyes. Please, you're divorcing him, but you're still entangled. If he goes down for fraud or money laundering, you and your precious foundation might get dragged down too. Elizabeth's stomach tightened. How do you know about the foundation's troubles? Cheryl smirked, sipping the water a waiter had just poured. I was involved in setting up some of those shell accounts. Jonathan needed my help to access certain international networks. I have connections, models, clients, wealthy individuals overseas. It wasn't that complicated once we set up the right channels. Elizabeth's fingers curled into fists. So you admit you aided his crimes? Cheryl shrugged. We had an arrangement. He funded my lifestyle and I helped him launder money. Don't act so shocked. This kind of thing happens every day in high society. Revulsion churned inside Elizabeth. She'd never felt so repulsed. So you're complicit. Why come to me now? Cheryl drummed her manicured nails on the table. Because Jonathan's in panic mode. He's cutting deals behind the scenes, trying to pin everything on me if this goes to trial. I have proof documents, emails, voice recordings. If I release them, it'll be clear Jonathan orchestrated everything, but it'll also show that the foundation's finances were used. You'll be in the spotlight too. Elizabeth's breath caught. Are you blackmailing me? Not necessarily. I just want a deal, Cheryl said sweetly. If you and I can work together, we can bury the evidence of your foundation's involvement. I'll direct the authorities to focus solely on Jonathan. You come out clean. I slip away with enough money to keep my mouth shut, and Jonathan faces the music. Shock, fury, disgust, it all whirled inside Elizabeth's head. She stared at Cheryl in disbelief. You're unbelievable. You wrecked my marriage, manipulated Jonathan, and now you want me to pay you to save my foundation. Cheryl sipped her water calmly. You can cling to your moral high ground, but we both know the system is ruthless. People like Jonathan don't go down without casualties. The cops will freeze assets, the press will have a field day, and your philanthropic ventures will be smeared. Trust me, the more you try to pretend you're above this, the harder you'll fall. Elizabeth stood, abruptly, eyes flashing. I won't stoop to your level. I'll fight legally and ethically. You can rot in prison for all I care. Cheryl laughed a cold sound. Good luck with that. I'll give you 48 hours to reconsider. After that, I'll release everything. The police, the media, everyone gets full disclosure with your name front and center. Elizabeth's hand shook as she grabbed her purse. She turned to leave, but paused, leveling Cheryl with a final glare. You underestimate me. Cheryl's smile only widened. We'll see. Elizabeth stormed out, heart pounding, a swirl of conflicting emotions surging in her chest. She wanted to believe in the justice system, in the possibility of exposing Cheryl's lies without being dragged down. But beneath her righteous anger, a seed of doubt took root. Could Cheryl's blackmail bring down the entire foundation? Back at her hotel, Elizabeth relayed the meeting's events to Andrea and Robert Mullins. Andrea was outraged, calling Cheryl's bluff nothing short of extortion. Mullins took a more calculated approach. It's blackmail, plain and simple, he said, pacing the suite. But she's also a key witness. If she can prove Jonathan's direct involvement, the prosecution could focus on him rather than the foundation. On the other hand, if she hands those documents over and they show your name anywhere in the chain of command, the authorities might investigate you as an accessory. Elizabeth pressed her hand to her forehead. I never signed anything illegal. If Jonathan forged my signature or used the foundation's name, I had no knowledge. Surely that counts for something. Mullins nodded. It does, but innocence alone doesn't protect you from a lengthy investigation. The press will sensationalize everything, and your philanthropic partners might back away to avoid the scandal. Andrea cleared her throat. So what's the plan? Are we entertaining her demand? Elizabeth bristled. No, I refuse to pay her anything. If she's as guilty as Jonathan, they both need to face the consequences. Mullins's eyes flicked between the two women. I respect that stance, but we must be prepared for the fallout. The following day, they worked tirelessly to compile every piece of evidence proving Elizabeth's non-involvement emails indicating Jonathan ran the finances without her approval board, minutes from the foundation showing Elizabeth's philanthropic focus, and sworn statements from staff. Mullins believed a strong documentation trail could exonerate her if Cheryl's blackmail turned into a public scandal. Yet as hours passed, Elizabeth's phone remained silent. No new messages from Cheryl, no breaking headlines. Anxiety thrummed in Elizabeth's veins, each minute feeling like a countdown to an inevitable bombshell. With the divorce not yet finalized and Jonathan's whereabouts unknown, she braced for any disaster that might strike next. On the second evening after Cheryl's threat, a phone call came. It was from a blocked number. Elizabeth answered, tension coiling in her gut. A man's voice spoke. Mrs. Harrington, this is Detective Donahue. You need to come to the station. We have someone in custody who's asking for you. Elizabeth exchanged a look with Andrea, who was seated across the suite. Who is it? Elizabeth asked. The detective's tone was grave. Cheryl Lansing. She's being charged with assault and resisting arrest. She specifically asked to see you. Elizabeth's heart lurched. I'll be there. When she arrived at the Beverly Hills Police Department, Detective Donahue ushered her into a small interrogation room. Behind a one-way mirror, Elizabeth saw Cheryl, hair disheveled, mascara smeared a bruise forming on her cheek. She looked rattled, a far cry from the confident vixen who'd confronted Elizabeth at the mansion and at the Ivy. Donahue explained that Cheryl had been picked up after a dispute at a luxury hotel where she allegedly attacked a man demanding money from her. Hotel security intervened, and when the police arrived, Cheryl reportedly lashed out, scratching an officer's arm. Elizabeth eyed Cheryl with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Why does she want to see me? Donahue shrugged. She mentioned something about a deal. She said you'd understand. Elizabeth exhaled slowly. All right, let me speak to her. Inside the interrogation room, the door clicked shut behind Elizabeth. Cheryl looked up, eyes filled with desperation. Her hands trembled as she fiddled with a styrofoam cup of water. You came, Cheryl murmured. Thank you. Elizabeth remained standing. What do you want, Cheryl? Did your blackmail plan blow up in your face? Cheryl grimaced. You don't understand. I was attacked. The man at the hotel was a messenger for someone else, someone connected to Jonathan's overseas deals. They demanded I hand over the documents incriminating him or they'd ruin me. I refused. Things got violent. Elizabeth crossed her arms, skepticism etched on her face. Sounds like you're in trouble. Cheryl's eyes brimmed with tears. I never meant for it to go this far. I was just... Jonathan promised me a life of luxury. I got caught up in the power of the money. I didn't realize the criminals he was tied to. She paused, shaking her head. They're dangerous. They were threatening me if I didn't cooperate. Elizabeth studied Cheryl's tear-streaked face. Was this genuine remorse or another performance? Why call me? She asked quietly. Cheryl sniffed, looking up with eyes that glistened. Because I can't trust Jonathan. And you're the only other person who wants him exposed. I still have the evidence documents recordings, but I want immunity. I'll testify against him if you can get me a deal with the DA. Elizabeth stared at her waves of conflicting emotion crashing inside. Cheryl had caused so much pain. She was a liar, a blackmailer, an accomplice. But she also possessed the key to destroying Jonathan's criminal empire. If she testified, it could clear Elizabeth's name, preserve the foundation, and hold Jonathan accountable. "Why should I believe you?" Elizabeth finally asked. Cheryl placed a trembling hand over her heart. "Because I have no one else to turn to, and because I'm done lying. Please, Elizabeth, help me make this right." Elizabeth wavered, her sense of justice battling her anger. If Cheryl truly had evidence that could exonerate the foundation and bring Jonathan's crimes to light, ignoring it would be a mistake. Still forging an alliance with her mistress felt like a bitter pill. At length, Elizabeth sighed. "I'll speak to my lawyer about contacting the DA. If you really have what you claim, we can negotiate a deal. But you're going to have to come clean, completely." Cheryl nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I will. Thank you." Their eyes locked in that tense moment. The scorn and fury that once defined their relationship hung in the air like a ghost. Now, they stood at a crossroads, an unlikely alliance that could either free them both or drag them into deeper chaos. Over the next few days, Elizabeth and Andrea worked with Detective Donahue and the district attorney's office to arrange a proffer session for Cheryl. Robert Mullins negotiated a preliminary agreement stating that if Cheryl provided verifiable evidence implicating Jonathan in illegal activities and cleared Elizabeth of any involvement, prosecutors would consider reduced charges for Cheryl's role in the scheme. Cheryl, out on bail, handed over a trove of encrypted files. The data painted a disturbing picture of Jonathan's dealings, bribes to foreign officials, money laundering through shell companies, offshore accounts, funneling millions. Scrolling through email chains, Elizabeth felt sick at how systematically Jonathan had used the Foundation's good reputation as cover. But that wasn't all. Buried in the files were personal correspondences, voice memos, text messages revealing a darker side to Jonathan. He'd threatened subordinates who suspected wrongdoing, bragged about paying off certain officials in Mexico and the Middle East, and even hinted at removing obstacles if they jeopardized his operations. The Jonathan Harrington that Elizabeth had once admired was nowhere to be found. In his place stood a ruthless, power-hungry manipulator. Armed with this evidence, the district attorney's office authorized a sting operation. They believed Jonathan was still trying to move assets to avoid seizure, possibly with the help of overseas contacts. The plan lured him into a meeting with Cheryl, who would claim she'd retrieved the incriminating data and was ready to hand it over if he provided a final payoff. With the police listening in, Jonathan's confessions or attempts at bribery would seal the case against him. Elizabeth was conflicted about the sting. A part of her wanted to personally confront Jonathan, demand answers for his betrayal, but she knew the safer route was to let the law handle it. She didn't want to risk her own safety or compromise the operation. Finally, a meeting was arranged at a private yacht Jonathan had docked in Marina del Rey. Cheryl called Jonathan, feigning desperation. She told him she'd been arrested, that she had the evidence, and the only way she'd stay quiet was if he paid her immediately. Jonathan, likely cornered by the ongoing investigation, agreed. He demanded secrecy and insisted they meet at the yacht, far from prying eyes. On the appointed evening, Detective Donahue and a team of undercover officers hid aboard the yacht, concealed in cabins. Elizabeth waited anxiously on the dock, accompanied by Andrea and Mullins, who monitored a live audio feed. She'd insisted on being present, though, at a safe distance. Cheryl arrived first, wearing a wire. Her voice trembled with fabricated fear as she greeted Jonathan on the deck. Elizabeth listened through headphones, her heart hammering. "Thank you for coming," Cheryl said. "I told you they've got me pinned. I can't go to jail, Jonathan. I won't survive." Jonathan's voice was tense. "Calm down. Give me the data, and I'll make sure you're taken care of." Cheryl's voice quivered. "How are you going to wire me the money? I need cash, and I need a plan to get out of the country." Jonathan cursed under his breath. "I have a contact in Rio de Janeiro. They'll set you up. But I need the files first, all of them. No copies." Cheryl paused, playing her role perfectly. "And Elizabeth, she has no clue, right? You're not throwing me under the bus to save your own skin." Jonathan's tone sharpened. "Elizabeth is a liability. She's playing the victim, but I won't let her ruin me. I have ways of dealing with her. But first, the files." Elizabeth's stomach churned at how coldly he spoke about her. The man she once loved sounded like a villain from a crime drama. She heard rustling, likely Cheryl, handing over a thumb drive. "That's everything," Cheryl said quietly. "Emails, recordings, bank statements." Jonathan exhaled heavily. "Good. I'll see that you're—" Suddenly a clamor erupted through the headphones, shouting the sound of scuffling footsteps and the unmistakable ring of firearms being drawn. Detective Donahue's voice blared, "LAPD, hands up!" Elizabeth's breath caught. Andrea clutched her arm. Through the feed, they heard Jonathan roaring in fury, Cheryl crying out, officers barking commands. Then came a flurry of motion on the dock as the police led Jonathan off the yacht in handcuffs. His face was thunderous hair, disheveled, but there was no mistaking the finality of the moment. Elizabeth, Andrea, and Mullins hurried toward the police vehicles, adrenaline surging. Detective Donahue held Jonathan by the arm as they reached the dock, reading him his rights. A second officer had Cheryl's wrist in a gentle grip, though she wasn't cuffed. She wore the wire, tears staining her cheeks, but her gaze was determined. Jonathan caught sight of Elizabeth, and his eyes blazed with hatred. "You," he spat, "you set me up." Elizabeth met his glare with a cold calm she didn't realize she was capable of. "You set yourself up the moment you decided to break the law and our marriage." He lunged toward her, snarling, but the officers restrained him. "You'll regret this," he growled. "I'll make sure you go down with me." Elizabeth stood firm, heart pounding. "I think we both know you don't have that power anymore." Detective Donahue ushered Jonathan into a squad car, slamming the door. A hush settled over the dock, interrupted only by flashing lights and police chatter. Cheryl stood to the side, arms crossed, looking drained. Elizabeth approached her cautiously. "You did the right thing," she said, voice subdued. Cheryl nodded, not meeting her gaze. "I know, but it doesn't fix everything I've done." Elizabeth studied the woman who had once been her most bitter rival. The DA might show leniency, she offered, if you're genuinely remorseful and continue to cooperate. Cheryl shrugged. "Maybe, I really did love him at first, or at least the version of him I thought I knew, but it all got twisted." Elizabeth offered a slight nod, empathizing despite herself. "He fooled both of us." With that, Cheryl was led away by another officer for debriefing. Elizabeth watched her go, a strange mix of sadness and relief washing over her. The woman who'd once threatened her life and marriage was now a reluctant ally. The man who'd betrayed and endangered them both was on his way to jail. It was a conclusion Elizabeth never imagined on her wedding day, or even when she first discovered Jonathan's affair. But despite the swirling emotions, a sense of finality and liberation grew in her chest. She'd confronted the truth, faced her fears, and taken a stand against the corruption that threatened to consume everything she valued. Now came the reckoning and the rebuilding. In the weeks that followed Jonathan's arrest, prosecutors built a robust case against him. Cheryl's testimony and the mountains of digital evidence ensured a near-ironclad prosecution. While she faced reduced charges for her complicity, her cooperation saved her from a harsher sentence. She ultimately pleaded guilty to lesser offenses, receiving probation and mandatory community service. Elizabeth focused on salvaging the Harrington Foundation. She worked tirelessly with auditors and investigators, turning over every suspicious transaction. Her transparency and the new leadership structure convinced key donors to stay. Though the scandal rocked public trust, her candid approach to cleaning house gradually restored faith in the Foundation's mission. The divorce proceeded swiftly once Jonathan's legal troubles mounted. With his assets frozen and the evidence of his infidelity abundantly clear, he had little leverage. Through Andrea's skilled representation, Elizabeth secured the mansion, though she chose to sell it soon after disliking the memories etched into its walls and a fair settlement. More importantly, she protected herself and the Foundation from liability. On a crisp morning, Elizabeth found herself standing in front of the media on the steps of the Los Angeles Superior Court. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. She took a breath, recalling all she'd endured, the heartbreak, the betrayals, the near destruction of her life's work. "I'm grateful for the support and understanding I've received," Elizabeth said into the microphone. "The last few months have been a harrowing journey, but I believe in justice, and I believe in the resilience of honest people who refuse to be part of corruption. The Harrington Foundation will continue its philanthropic mission under a new name and with stricter oversight to ensure we remain a beacon of integrity." When she concluded, applause from a few onlookers mingled with the frenzy of reporters. Andrea stood behind her, beaming with pride. Elizabeth stepped away, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer Jonathan Harrington's wife, no longer shackled by secrets. As she left the courthouse, she thought of Cheryl, who was likely fulfilling her community service hours at a women's shelter in Hollywood. A small part of Elizabeth hoped Cheryl would find a more grounded path, having seen the dark side of wealth and power. In the coming months, Elizabeth poured her heart into rebranding the foundation, now called the Carmichael Trust, honoring her maiden name. She partnered with reputable NGOs, ensuring every dollar was accounted for. She traveled to visit projects overseas, forging new connections, and personally apologizing to anyone affected by Jonathan's corruption. Gradually, her name was associated not with scandal, but with perseverance and sincerity. On a hazy afternoon in June, Elizabeth packed her belongings in a sunlit office overlooking downtown LA. The last few boxes contained old memories, pictures of her and Jonathan at fundraisers awards with both their names engraved. She placed them aside for storage, uncertain if she'd ever want to look at them again, yet a sense of calm filled her. She'd stood up to the man who wronged her, dismantling the facade of their fairy tale marriage. She'd protected her life's work, and she'd discovered a reservoir of strength she never knew she possessed. As Elizabeth stepped outside, the warm breeze brushed her face. She tipped her head back, letting the sunshine wash over her, imagining a horizon full of promise. This was the dawn of a new day, and she was finally free. Even the mightiest fortress of luxury and deceit can crumble under the weight of truth. Elizabeth Harrington walked away from her tumultuous marriage with her head held high and with a renewed determination to rebuild her legacy on honesty and compassion. Jonathan's downfall served as a stark reminder that no fortune can shield a person from consequences when corruption and betrayal run rampant. Yet out of every shattered piece of this scandal rose a stronger, more fearless woman, one committed to protecting the charitable mission she once shared with her husband. Now the newly established Carmichael Trust stands as a testament to resilience, proving that integrity triumphs over greed. Thank you for watching and listening to this gripping tale. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more high-stakes dramas, real-life lessons, and captivating narratives. Your support helps us continue unveiling stories of courage and redemption.